Okay, so we continue, and today we're talking about topic number 2, imperfect competition factor market. Previous lecture we have discussed about perfect competitive market, and we learned how firms, when purchasing input, how they make a decision. So today we're going where firms have some power, where most of you maybe knows about monopoly power or monopolistic that we have studied. So we talk about factor markets in monopsony power. Means that when a firm has a power when purchasing the input, and factor market with a monopoly power, here where that supply that power with monopoly. So you can see this when we talk about monopsony power, the firm that want to buy the input and it has the power, and when we talk about monopoly power, the firm that sells the input and has the power. And we do some analysis of the imperfect competition market. So first of the thing, before I start, I may give you an idea on what do we mean about monopsony power. We can define in different ways, but two more, what we say, famous concept or ways where you have a firm, for example, specialized in one nature of business. Put it in a way that there is a firm, for example, buying an input, it's a product to produce its product. And that input is only that particular firm that buy it. For example, smartphone, let's say iPhone, they different mechanism or system, and even they have different software. So iPhone, when Apple want to produce an iPhone, maybe it is only the buyer for a particular, for example, or the glass or the screen they use in the iPhone. Please, can you mute your mic? Yeah, so in that case, we say that Apple has monopsony power because it is only the firm that buy that particular input. It has the bargaining power or the power to determine at what price want to buy that input. So another idea could be, for example, when a location, for example, there are suppliers for a particular, an input here in Kampa, and there is only one firm or one firm that buy that input. So in that case, this firm, let's say in Kampa, have this monopsony power because only the firm that purchase that type of input. So that is location. So in here, monopsony power can also arise when buyer of a factor from also another thing, cartel, when few firms, they make a cartel and they make as a group or as a union on the cartel to purchase particular input, and after they can distribute among each other. So that where they have a power to negotiate on the price on that input. So you can see here what we mean about monopsony power. Then also we can have some of the firms are pure monopsonists, but also there are so many other firms or even individuals, maybe even yourself, that you may have some monopsony, but not all, because your purchases account a large portion of the market. So an example, government is a monopolist and it hires, for example, soldiers as a volunteer, or when it buys an arms, or an aircraft, or other specialized military equipment. So only government can buy that. So in that case, we say government is monopoly. Monopoly power also may be limited to, because the government also compete to some that of a similar job. For example, mining. Government maybe has mining of some of the sources, or some like tin in Malaysia, maybe gold. So we have also other companies also, or private companies, they can do that. So this is a brief introduction on about what we mean about monopoly. So individuals also can be as a buyers, and also have a buyer power that allows them to affect the price they pay for the input. And when this happens, when a firm or individual, or that firm has a monopoly power, or there are only a few buyers, in which, example, there are so many sellers, or even one seller, but there's only a few buyers, and those buyers, they can choose where to buy. An example in automobile industry, if you ask you which number one, for example, automobile now in the world, if you are following the news, you will find Toyota is selling more cars, number one in the world. So what does it mean? That means that Toyota has the largest share in the market, therefore producing a lot of cars. When you're producing a lot of cars, you need a lot of input, and therefore, so Toyota maybe has a huge portion of the component of car, or spare part of the cars that used in Toyota, like brake, like the glass or sheet glass, like other components. So in that case, we can say Toyota has this monopoly power as a buyer. Also, you may have only 2 or 3 sellers of that particular input or factor, and even you have many buyers. But if each buyer has, what we say, a huge purchase, and that purchase is not that regular, not frequently, infrequent, then it has a bargaining power also on one person here. And give you an example here, an example of the airline industry. Supplier, how many? The 2 major supply of airplane is Boeing and Airbus. But how many airlines? There is a lot. In Malaysia, we have Asia, Mars, we have Lion Air, we have others, small companies. But over the world, is hundreds, maybe thousands of airlines operating. So, see, the market is huge for Boeing and Airbus. But you might ask me that, then in that case, why, when we have so many suppliers, only few suppliers, in that case, only 2, Boeing and other, Airbus, but there are so many buyers, but still those buyers have the monopoly power. They have the bargaining power than the others. Can anyone tell me why this could happen? Later I will tell you the answer. Put it in your mind. So we talk about the marginal and the average expenditure. So when a firm decides how much of a good to purchase or of import, you always actually, if we put it in our case as a buyers, if you want to buy a product, so you always we keep increasing the number of unit purchased until what we say the additional value of that last unit purchase, or that what we call the marginal revenue, or this is if you want to buy a good, because when we buy a good, we will have value for it. So we keep buying that until your marginal value of that good is equal to the marginal cost or marginal expenditure, how much you spend. So this is imperfect competition. So the price you pay for that particular good, which is average expenditure also, we call it, is equal to the marginal expenditure. And this is, we already have discussed it in the in the microeconomic one. However, when you are working in the monopsony power, marginal expenditure in the case of purchasing the input, we call monopsony power. But if you put it as an output, we call the monopoly. If you remember, in the monopoly power also, the marginal expenditure is always greater than the average expenditure, or the marginal cost is greater than the average cost. Then also that one, if you go back to microeconomic one, we will find that. So the factor supply curve facing the monopoly, monopsony is the market supply curve, which shows how much of factor suppliers are willing to sell at its price increase. So we're going to see that later in the graph in details on how actually this work. Later we have this graph, we will explain it. So again, remember that because the monopsonists always pay the same price for each unit, because when you cannot buy 1 unit at 5 ringgit, then if I buy 2 units for 80, then if I buy, so you are going to buy the sum of units at the same price. So your supply curve is, in this case, the average expenditure curve. And the average expenditure curve would be an upward sloping, because the decision to buy an extra unit automatically will rise the price. The more unit you want to buy, the higher price you're going to pay, right? That is the concept. So therefore, the price that must be paid for all units, not just one unit or last 1 unit. So you're going to pay for all units. For a profit maximizing firm, you have marginal expenditure curve, or ME, or before we talk about the marginal cost, right? But now talking, because it's also an expenditure or cost. That marginal expenditure is relevant in deciding actually how much to buy. Why? Because the marginal expenditure curve is above the average expenditure curve, because here we are in the monopsony or the monopoly in the output. So when the firm increases the price of the factor to hire more units, all units that higher price and not just the last unit high. So I know that you may confuse, when we learn in microeconomic one, we learn about input. So when we learn about input, we talk about how decide companies, we learn about output. When we learn about output, means that how much the firm should produce in order to sell, to maximize the profit. Now we are talking about other parts. We are talking about the input, the factors. So here we are talking about another type of monopoly, but we call it monopsony, which is where the price at what quantity should buy the input, not sell the output, should buy the input to maximize the profit. One of the input is labor. So when we talk about labor, we talk the price of labor is the wage, how much, this labor is higher. So to understand it, we look at this graph. So the question now, how much of the firm in order to produce Y? So if you look at this graph, the firm should buy where the marginal expenditure curve interact with the marginal revenue product. Means that marginal expenditure or MEO, the marginal cost, equals to the marginal revenue product, which is MPR. This is MPR, and this is the marginal expenditure. So at point A, we have L star equal to 4. So here, the benefit from the last unit brought from this marginal revenue product is equal to the marginal. And when we have ME equal to MRP, here the wage rate should be at how much? Here, because this is the average expenditure of the wages or supply of labor. When we talk about wages, so we are talking about labor. So at L star, when the marginal expenditure equal to the marginal revenue product at this A, give us L star. How much? So this is the supply of labor. So we will have W star or 30. So monopsony power maximize the net benefit, or what we call it utility less expenditure, from a purchase by buying up to the point where the marginal value means that equals something to MRPL, right? Marginal value of that input is equal to the marginal expenditure. So we have something like, yeah. So we will have like MV or marginal value equal to the marginal expenditure. Marginal value is the marginal revenue product. Okay. So in this figure also, we can see that the monopsony company hire less labor than a firm, any other firms with a no monopsony power. You can see this is the monopsony, because in the monopsony, expenditure is above the average expenditure. It's higher here. But other firms, especially those who work in a competitive labor market, actually the marginal expenditure equal to the average expenditure here, so it will higher at CLC. In competitive labor market, the LC workers would be higher. At that level, the quantity of labor, it will be LC, in between 5 and 10, right? And the wage is WC, which is 15. So you can see also that in the monopolist firm will be paying its worker a wage W star compared those other companies that are paying WC, than the others firm. Here, now, once the firm create an economic inefficiency, always when we talk about monopoly in the output, if you remember, we talk about the inefficiency or the deadweight loss. So when we're talking about monopsony, it also some but in the input side, right? So we are talking about efficiency or the loss to the society. So since the firm in monopsony hire too few workers and pay them a wage that is too low, society lose. And because if hired each of the additional, this LC minus L star, the difference between this labor LC, that is people will be unemployed, right? The L star worker, the LC worker would contribute value to society as measured by productivity equal the price times marginal product of each labor of that will be given there. So in that case, the deadweight loss will be A, B, and C. A, B, and C. Because by right, the equilibrium is here, the wage is higher, and the employed is also higher. But since the firm operates in monopsony, it pays less wages and hire less people, and therefore this is always the loss of the society. So A, B, and C will be if the deadweight loss due to the monopsony power. So those are some of examples that we can use to explain, a monopsony power. Just now I give you about government. When government, buy government hire voluntary soldiers or buy bombers or whatever. Government only the person that operate and has and this purchase also it comes at quantities and are infrequent. Usually government doesn't buy arms or missiles or bombers every day, right? Sometimes few years, 2 years they buy. And also for NASA, where the input of producing these, what we call them, the things they send to the space rocket or whatever. So also the purchase is huge, but it is infrequent, and this is what I explained just now for the case of Airbus, because we say that even though that we have so many companies that they buy the aeroplane and only two buyers, sellers or suppliers, but the buyers who have the monopoly or the buying power rather than the Airbus, because the purchase if if those airlines buy will be huge, billions of dollars, and that purchase is not frequent, it's infrequent. It's happened once 5 years. For example, if you check when Mars bought the last fleet, maybe you find it before 5 years, then only we buy a new one. So here we talk about the bargaining power. So if you see in some factor market, a small number of sellers or buyers will lead to price negotiation depending on the bargaining power. So let's say bilateral monopoly where we have 1-to-1. So this bargaining power between the seller and the buyer will depend on two things: the number of competing buyers and the nature of the purchase. If it is large or infrequent, I just have to explain. So if we talk about the first one, it is determined by the number of competing buyers and sellers. Let's say if each buyer makes a large And the second one, the nature of purchase. If the buyer makes a large or infrequent purchase. So here I think that in the case of Boeing and Airbus, that Boeing and Airbus, they should have the bargaining power because there are only two suppliers, and I say there are a lot of so many airlines companies that they buy. If Mars doesn't want to buy, maybe Japan Airlines will buy. You may think in that way, but if you are thinking in this way, then I'm telling you, you are wrong. Because here, yes, there are only two airlines, but it is like that. If, let's say, Japan Airlines want to buy 20 or 30 fleet or airplane, that costs Japan Airlines around 10 billions or maybe over for that purchase. It's a huge amount of money for Boeing. And that purchase, when Japan Airlines buy, is not frequent. I mean, once buy now, maybe I will take another 5 or 10 years to do another order. Boeing and Airbus, they try their best and do whatever they can in order to gain, that offer or to get Japan offer. So here, what Japan Airlines will do first, we'll go to Boeing, for example, and ask and start bargaining and ask for discount. Since Boeing knows that if they don't give a very good price for Japan Airlines will go to Airbus, so will be good price. But Japan will not buy easily. Also, we go to Airbus and we tell them, oh, see guys, I went to Boeing offer me this price. I think that we should give better. Try to give a much discount, then go back to Boeing. They keep doing like that until they reach the maximum discount we're going to get, either from Boeing or from Airbus, depend. So in that case, actually, the bargaining power, it was not for Boeing and Airbus, but it was for the Japan Airlines. So you can see, even though that we have so many airlines operating in the world, more than hundreds, maybe 1,000, and only two suppliers or major suppliers, which is Boeing and Airbus, but the bargaining power goes to the Japan airline because of that. The things I say, the purchase is huge and the purchase is not frequently happens. You have any question? So now we talk about the monopoly. So monopoly, as I said, when just now we talk about the monopsony. The monopsony is the power, but it is for the company that need to purchase the input or for the a monopoly is for the supplier or for the seller. So just as a buyer of input can have monopsony power, sellers of input can have also monopoly power. The seller of an input may be a monopolist, as when a firm has a patent produced, for example, if you still remember, when iPhone first was introduced or invented in 2007, Apple has a patent for that. And you remember the story of the war between Apple and Samsung, because Samsung, let's say, developed or initiated the Galaxy, and Apple says that Samsung steals the idea, and even the way the phone is functioning is exactly as the iPhone, and they start, all this, war in the coal for years. Then suddenly after that, if you still remember, after 5 years, then you hear no more about this war, because usually in the US, is years. After 5 years, others companies, they can copy the idea, whatever. And now we have so many. Okay, so that time from 2007 2012, let's say, Apple has that monopoly power, even though that Samsung also was, working in that. But by right, it has. Let's assume it put it in a different way, that government company, for example, generating, for example, or producing solar energy, and government give you that monopoly power for 5 years. So for 5 years, no one can compete with you, and you can decide at what time you want to sell the solar panel, right? After 5 years, when your patent is already, this power given by authorities or by government is over, then other companies, they can compete. So of course, in real scenario, there is so many companies of monopoly or monopsony, but to make things easier for us to understand, we assume that only one company is working in the market. So here you can see now in this graph that the demand for labor curve, also when we are talking about monopsony, we are talking about two. We are talking about monopsony, we are talking about, so that you will get an idea, right? Choose one. Monopsony is for the buyer of the input, and monopoly is for the seller of the input. So the input, we assume it is labor. We're still talking about labor, L, and this W is wages. So here the demand for the labor curve in the market with no monopsony power, marginal revenue product of the firm that compete to buy that labor. So we have also the labor supply curve will describe how union members here would supply labor, because after 1970 we start knowing about this union labor to give the right for labors. So union labor will supply the labor. So that supply labor, if the union exerted no monopoly power, and we have also when the union has monopoly. So in the case, the labor market would be competitive if there is no monopoly power, right? If there is no monopoly power, then we have the demand of labor intersect with the supply of labor. Then we will have in that interaction will L star, and the weight will be W star. And this is what we call a competitive market. Because of its monopoly power, union, they can, once they have the power to decide how much labor should put in the market, the union can choose any wage rate and the corresponding quantity for labor supply. It can choose now at point A is the equilibrium, but in that case, since those unions, they have a power, they can choose to be here, to be here, or to be here. But their decision also, they need to maximize the benefit for the workers. So just as any monopolies sell price and the corresponding quantity of the output, this union. But if the union wanted to maximize the number of workers hired in this case, it would choose the complete outcome at A, because there where the supply intersect with the demand. But if the union wants to obtain a higher than competitive wage. That means the wage is higher. So in that case, this W star should go up. But where? It could maybe restrict its membership to, instead to L star, but to L1. And this is the marginal revenue of those labor, right? So what the marginal revenue equal to the, actually the marginal revenue is the, actually is work like a demand equal to the supply we have here at L1. At L1, the market, total market, the demand, it is here. So at that price will be W1. So you can see the price go from W star shooted to W1. But the union members who work would be better, but those who cannot find job would be worse off because they will have, what we say, zero income, since the number of labor decreased from L star to L1. We have only few people who work, actually. So many of them, they lose. Few of them, those who are with L1, they are better off because their wages increase from W star to W1. But those who are out of job, those from the category from L star minus L1, they will be worse off because, as I say, they have no more job. Now we talk about monopoly power of seller of labor. So the question comes, is policy of restricting union membership worthwhile or no? When those unions restrict member of labor to join the union, is that really worthy or no? If that works or no? We say yes if maximizing economic gain is the goal. And in this case, the union acts like a monopolist restricting output to maximize the profit. And the rent for union represent the wages and in excess of opportunity cost, how much those workers they are willing to work. So union must choose workers so that the marginal cost equal to the marginal revenue. This is what we know. So I explained that. I say if the union wishes to maximize the economic rent that the worker receives in terms of wages, right? So the answer is yes, because by restricting membership, the union will be acting like a monopolist, means that they restrict the output or the labor, number of labor, in order to maximize the profit. When there is less labor, the wages will increase. To a firm, profit is the revenue that is received less the opportunity cost, or the marginal revenue minus marginal cost. So, but to union, rent represent the wages that is member earn as a group in excess of this opportunity cost. Means that to maximize the rent, the union must choose a number of workers that are allowed to be hired so that the marginal revenue to the union or the additional wage earned for that restriction is equal to the extra cost inducing workers to work. So always now you still can remember in Microeconomics 1 we say the firm produce the output when the marginal revenue equal to the marginal cost, and this is what the union done. So they will restrict the labor number of workers to subscribe or to be with membership, so that the marginal revenue to the union or the additional wage earned for that restriction is equal to the extra cost inducing workers to work. So always now you still can remember in Microeconomics 1 we say the firm produce the output when the marginal revenue equal to the marginal cost, and this is what the union done. So they will restrict the labor number of workers to subscribe or to They keep doing that until they reach to the marginal revenue in terms of wages equal to the marginal cost. But this cost is marginal opportunity cost because it is a measure of what an employer has to offer on additional worker to get him or to get her work for the firm. So why we say an opportunity cost? Because you as a person, if I ask you, do you work for me? I say, okay, $20. You will say no. Because for you, the opportunity cost, and instead to work for me, if you go and work for another firm, or you go and do another thing, maybe you get more than that. So that, no. If I ask now, can I give you 30? Then here, your marginal cost or opportunity cost, maybe you will say yes, because what I offer in terms of marginal revenue is greater than what you are going to lose or to what do you say? Um, how to say the word in English? Trade off. Yes, trade off. You know, in order to work for me, you are trading off something or to do your own business or to work for another firm. So if that is less than what I'm offering, then you say, okay. However, the wage that is necessary to encourage additional workers to take job is given by the supply of labor curve SL, and here we see it in this graph, right? Easy. So whatever wage we offer, it must be how many quantities also, or how many labor, sorry, is going to be employed. If L2, then the wage with W2. If L star, the wage will be in W star. If L1, so the wage will be at W1. So also, rent maximizing combination of wage rate and number of workers is where the marginal revenue crosses the supply. And at that, let me give you the graph so that you can confuse. So the marginal revenue, this is of the labor, crosses the supply line, and we will have in that case, it is here at L, how much the wage is W1, right? L1, W1. So we have chosen the wage employment combination of W1 with the rent maximized in that scenario. And where is the economic rent will be the shaded area below the demand. This is the demand. Sorry. So the shaded area, this is all will be economic rent. This is the demand below because this is the number of labor, which is L1, and therefore, so this below the demand, this, and we cannot go down because this is for the supplier. So will be this shaded area, and here we will have the economic range. So you can see in the monopoly power for the sellers, what it created again also gateway loss to society, because suppose in a competitive market we will have wages on star and employ and star. So This area here, this area, triangle, is the deadweight loss for the society. So if we look again to this figure here, we found in order to achieve the goal, maximizing rent to workers, the number of workers hired, as we say, is increased from L1, okay, until the marginal revenue of the union is equal to 0. Where is the marginal revenue equal to 0? It is at L2 here. So after when we decide, or this union decide to employ L1, now they keep increasing because they still can get some economic rent to maximize it, to increase it, until they reach marginal revenue equal to 0. Why marginal revenue equal to 0? Because you remember any further employment at here, it goes more than, because you put this down, it goes more L2, then the marginal revenue becomes negative. So any further employment decrease the total wage payment, and therefore the aggregate wage here are maximized when the wage is equal to W and C to W1. At L2 here, we have the margin, the wages equal to W2. So once the firm or the union, the monopoly, set up the wages at W1 and labor at L1, actually still there's room to get more economic rent, so they keep now increasing. But when they reach L2, the marginal revenue equal to 0, they stop, because a further employment, increase in employment or number of labor lead to marginal revenue to be in negative, and therefore that way, so actually the wages will be decreased. So they will stop in that at end. So we talk about the union now, how union use its power, monopoly power, to determine how much of labor work or determine the wages. Now we are going to talk about a non-unionized worker. This is explanation for this graph. I'm going straightforward to this graph, and you can read later the explanation in the previous. So we say when union use its monopoly power to increase the member wage, what happened is a few unionized workers only, because the number of should be. So because this worker, either they move to the non-union sector to find a job, or choose not to join the union. So it is important to understand what happened in the non-unionized part of the economy, where the sector does not have union. What happened there? So assume that here the total supply of labor is as L, which is both unionized and non-unionized worker, and we assume it for simplicity it is fixed. Okay. So the market supply of labor in both sectors is given by this as L, and the demand for labor the firm in the unionized sector, we put it as DU, and for non-unionized sector, we put it as DUN. So the total will be the horizontal sum DU plus DUN, and will give us a bit flatter, demand curve, which is DL. This is for the total market, including union and non-union. So suppose that union choose to increase the wage. Basically, if we talk about the market will determine the wage at W star, because there where the demand for labor equals the supply for labor, then we will have W star. Suppose here. But since those union chooses to increase the wage rate for the worker above the competitive wage, which is W star, so it will choose to put at WU. So at WU, they chooses then the labor for that WU will be at this DU, which is here. So these changes of the LU reducing, right? So the labor is reduced because the union choose to increase the wage. So we have here the number of workers hired in the unionized sector will fall by an amount of these changes of LU. And what happened? Those people, since they are not working, what they do, they need to decide to go for the non-unionized labor or non-union labor. So therefore, the number of labor in this sector for non-union will increase by changes of DL. So from here to here, therefore, when changing from here to here, then they will change from, because it was in the equilibrium, it was here at what we say, W star, a competitive wage. See the labor that already cannot find job here due to that union restricted the membership. So those people or change in LU, they come and find job in non-union. So therefore, the labor in non-union will increase by changes of LU and U from here to here. At this amount of L, the W will be shifted or decreased from W star to W and U. So in this figure, that shows that an adverse consequence of a union strategy directed toward rising union wage, but for a non-unionized wages fall. So actually the union, which is true, they only think about their members. So they increase the wage of their members, but what those in other non-union sector, the wages decrease further. A unionization can improve working conditions and provide useful information to workers and management, but when the demand for labor is not perfectly inelastic, means that any changes of wages, it does not really, increase or decrease the quantity demanded, then in this case, union workers are helped at the expense of a non-union workers. If we have the demand is, let's say, of labor is inelastic or perfectly inelastic, And those non-union, they will not say be a victim, but since it is not perfect in elastic, actually it is elastic, then the labor is elastic because it depends on the wages. Then the companies will hire more or less. In that case, action taken by union to increase the wages and provide a better condition for its members, this will be what we say a cause for other non-union workers to be a victim. So in this slide, we have a story about union membership. Actually, it started in 70s. During 70s, union wages relative to non-union wages start falling. So the membership of labor unions has been declining, if you can see here, and the decline has been relatively steady. But when we go in a 21st century, after 2000 and go, basically the rate of the decline began to diminish, and it is stagnant here since 2012 and become around 12% only. It was above almost 24, you see, 50% already, reduced. So now it's almost stagnant at 12. So you may ask, how have those unions responded to this, dynamic or this decline? So we may expect that the decline in union bargaining power may lead to different responses by union negotiators, and this has indeed been the case because historically union wages have been higher than the wages of the non-union side. But during the 70s, the difference between the union and non-union wages decreased as union focused on employment rather than wages. After 70s, actually they were not really considering about the condition of the wages, but rather than employment, how many we should employ. So that when we employ more, when we increase the number of workers, automatically the wages will keep declining and declining. But what happened in the 80s? So here union wages stabilized related to the non-union. Means that if you are a part of any union membership or no, your wages will be almost similar. And in 90s, the membership has been falling and wage differential has remained stable. And by 2006, unionized employment had fallen below 12 of the total employment, but the union non-union wage differential remained unchanged. So if I ask the question why, anyone can answer. Why did the wage differential decline over time? You may think of that the demand of unionized employees has become increasingly elastic over time. Means that any change of wages, if the wages increase, then that means a huge decrease of the demand of this union. So the unionized employee or labor become too much elastic over time. So that because for those firms or companies, they found it easier to substitute machines with labor, capital with labor. After 80s, once we start industrialization, 90s, especially now in 2000. So now you can see that machine can do everything. Now we have robots. So therefore, if the wages if those unions, they are bargaining for a higher wages, then we say, okay, fine, I don't need your worker because can substitute with computer, with machine. Also, globalization has meant that many companies were able to organize their production process so as to hire a non-union labor, because nowadays, because of this internet, information easily to hire non-union, because you just advertise in internet, in Facebook, or in social media, you will find the expertise that you're looking for. So the competition is very high. Faced with an elastic demand for each service, unions would have little choice but to give ground on wages in order to maintain employment level. So because of that, substitution of labor to machines, and also having firms having the full information or easily to reach the other targeted people, then this led to what we say the wages to decrease and unions power to keep decreasing and decreasing. So now we talk about regulation of monopsony. So again, that slide is an explanation for this graph. I go straight for that graph and we talk about it. So here, when we set the minimum price for an import at the point where the marginal revenue product, MRPL, equal to or intersect with the market supply curve, SN, so we have a beta slash or comma here. So here, the monosonist can be or can make to behave as a perfect competitor in the import market. And here the exploitation will be minimized or be zero, because this is actually what we say the wage of perfect competitive market. If the supply intersect with the demand, this works as a demand curve, marginal revenue product. If input is labor, the minimum wage that would eliminate labor exploitation can be set by the government or negotiated by the union, as just now we talked about it. But in the absence of minimum wage, okay, a monosonist, as shown in this figure here, hires 3 workers only instead of 4. At 3 workers, the wage is only 30 and less worker, right? At point E slash or A comma. So there where we have MP curve intersect with MEL. Okay, intersect with this, it will give us 3 worker. And the daily wage for that here, it will be at the supply of labor, we will have 30. Because the wage will be determined how many labor supply, right? 30. So, monopsonist exploitation of labor is given by the excess of this MRPL over W or wage at labor equal 3. So where it will be, suppose it's 60, but they are paying only 30. So in that case, 60 minus 30, right? $50, yes. So if the daily wage is set at 40, if the daily wage set at 40 in the equilibrium, where point B comma A, at which the MPRL curve intersect the supply curve. So we have this C B slash and F, so C, D slash and F becomes the new supply of labor curve facing the monopsonies. So instead of going this, because of the monopsonies choose at this intersection of MEL with MPRL, at that here, the labor supply is only 3 at wage 30. Then here we have the equilibrium wage at 40. So that the new supply will be for monopsonies is C at 40 this, B slash and F. So the new MEL curve is then will be C, correct? Then goes to B slash, then go to B up here at 4, then go to G and above there. So with the vertical or continuous portion, this continuous portion. Actually, this is like something that exists. Actually, it goes from here to here, then you have from here to here. So this will be the new supply of labor. Instead of SL will be from here, then this. So to maximize the profit, when the minimum wage is 14 here is imposed, the monopsonies hires 4 workers here for hires 4. At point B slash here, where the marginal revenue product of labor curve intersect the new marginal EL curve, where exactly where we have W equal to MRPL equal to 40, right? So thus the monopsonies behave as a perfect competitor in the input market. If operate here at B slash here, it is a competitive market there, right? Where the marginal revenue product for labor intersect SN. Because we say that the supply is from C of 40 to B slash and B to G. So that intersect with marginal revenue product here, intersect in this point only here at B slash, which is also similar, is like that competitive. And the monopsonistic exploitation of labor is entirely eliminated. You can see, actually, this is the equilibrium, or what we call it, the competitive market wage. With the daily wage between 30 and 40, here, between 30 and 40, the monopsonies will hire 3 or 4 workers per day, and only part of the labor exploitation will be eliminated. If hire 4 with wage 40, it will be totally eliminated. If hire only 3 with wage 30, we will have some exploitation of labor. If the more goes up, goes here or here or here, this labor exploitation will be eliminated until it's 0 when it's higher 4. Setting wage at above 40 automatically will eliminate all labor exploitation, but the monopsonies will hire fewer than 4 workers. You will not hire more than that, because if I hire 5, right? it will not maximize the profit. Maximize the profit when MRPL equal to NE, or marginal cost or marginal expenditure equal to the marginal revenue product. So for monopsonies, the ME or the marginal expenditure is CB slash, then B, then this is. And the marginal revenue is this. So this interact with this only at point B slash, and there only what he will hire is 4, not more than 4. So this will result often in is unreachable in real world, but however, because of a lack of adequate data on the revenue productivity of labor and the marginal expenditure of labor, so we cannot know exactly, but we just say that it is between 3 and 4, and the wage is between 30 and 40. So, bilateral monopoly, a monopolistic buyer facing a monopolistic seller. One monopolistic buyer and one monopolistic seller. So both of them, they have the power. So how this could happen? So bilateral monopoly is said to exist when a single buyer of a product or an input, and this is what we call a monopsonist, face a single seller of the product of or an input, or we call it a monopolist. So this could be in real world maybe impossible, but we assume on that. So in a monopoly, the price and output are indeterminate in the sense that they cannot be established by the profit maximizing marginal calculation that we employ by saying that marginal revenue productivity equal to the marginal cost or marginal, expenditure. But rather, they are determined by relative bargaining strength of the monopolist and or the seller or the monopsonist buyer. So which one has more bargaining power may be the one who will win. So we see this in this graph. So this figure we have D is the monopsonist demand faced by monopolist, or the marginal revenue product of monopsonist. This is the D. So the curve D is also the market demand curve faced by the monopolist seller, because how much need this monopsonist, the buyer, in order to increase the marginal revenue product. So he needs to buy the input from the seller, which is the monopolist. So it is a demand for monopolist. The marginal revenue MR, this is the corresponding marginal revenue curve for the monopolist. The monopolist marginal cost curve is as shown in the figure here. Marginal cost of monopolist equal to the revenue at 5 units. Here, that buyer will maximize the profit, right? So at 5, we learn that a monopoly also monopolist will maximize the profit when the marginal revenue equal to the marginal cost. In that case, marginal revenue for the monopolist equal to the marginal cost for monopolist at 5 units. So how much he will hire? He will hire at B, or it sell at B, 15. He want to sell at 50. He sell the labor at, or the input, in that case it is labor, at 50 to maximize the profit. But what happens now for the monopsonist? To determine the monopsonist maximizing purchase of the product, we must realize that monopolist marginal cost curve is the supply curve. Okay. The marginal cost of the monopolist is the supply cost product that the monopolist faces. So this, the marginal cost, MC, is actually the supply curve for the monopolist or the monopolist face. So this shows the prices at which a monopolist can purchase here, here, or here. So where now this monopolist should purchase how many and at what price, or how many labor at what wage. So the monopolist marginal expenditure curve for product marginal this, it is higher than as indicated by the marginal expenditure. Well, the marginal expenditure is this. Here. So to maximize the profit, the monopolist must buy 4 units here. Why? Because at that point E, we have marginal revenue product equal to the marginal expenditure. So for the monopolist, you will maximize the profit when the marginal expenditure equal to the marginal revenue product, and this happen at E, 4 units. At 4 units, how much the supply faced by monopolist? At that one, it will be E slash at price of 8. Now you can see the monopolists want to sell at 15 to maximize. The monopolist, he want to buy at 8 to maximize the profit. So you can see it is a great difference. Now they start doing the bargaining. So to maximize the profit, the monopolist seller of the product want to sell Q5 and 15 units. Sorry, Q5, 5 units at $50 price. While monopolist buyer, he want to buy only 4 units at $8. So now why is the solution? The solution is actually not determined, and it will be depend on relative bargaining strength of the two firms. So we can only say that the level of output and sales of the product will be between 4 and 5 units, and the price will be between 8 and 15. So, sorry, 16, yeah, right? And 16, yeah, 16 here. 8 and 16. So here, now the greater the strength of bargaining, if the monopolists have an absolute bargaining strength of selling the product, means that the buyer really cannot find any other seller. No, he must sell from this only. So here the seller has the absolute bargaining power. Then in that case, the seller will win. He will sell 5 units at $15. If let's say the opposite way, the monopolist has the absolute power and greater power over the monopolist, then he will impose that on the seller and buy only 4 and pay only $8. So this is an example of how actually we have two powers or two players. One is seller, monopoly. One is a buyer of import, monopoly. So now we talk about this discrimination in employment. Discrimination between male and female workers of equal productivity effect on their wage in employment. And this is a long debate, always we talk about this discrimination. Usually, sometimes females do the same job like men, but they are less paid. So employer in an industry refuse to hire females. So that the supply curve equal, in this case, SM here. Supply SM. And you know why? Can anyone tell me what is the reasons why most of the time those employers, they refuse to hire more female? You should know it, I think, yes. So we may refer to hire males over females at the same wage rate, but employers' taste for discrimination isn't absolute, can be overcome by lower wage for female labor and higher also female, but in lower wages. So compare with the non-discrimination case, employer hire more males at higher wage and fewer female at lower wage. But if we say non-discriminating employers would employ mostly females enough non-discrimination. So here we employ all females, so no female or no male-female wage differences will be. So more firms enter the industry and will be attracted by lower female wages and tend to eliminate gender-based wage differences in the industry. Let's see this in this figure here. In this figure here, where the SF and the SM are the supply curve for female and male of labor, SM male, SF female, the supply, right? So SL is the total supply of female and male labor. This SL is the total including male and female. And DL, which is the demand for the total labor, whatever it is, male or female, but it's the total. So we can see that the absence of gender discrimination, the equilibrium wage is 40 here, at 40. So at 40, at point E, we have 600 workers. And that wage is both equal to male and female. There is no discrimination. How much? At that wage, 200 female hired. At this wage here, A, 200 female, and B, 400 male. So they are paid the same wage. However, if employers in the industry refuse to hire females, the supply curve labor of the industry would be only SM, no more this SM. It will be only SM because employers, they don't want to employ female. Therefore, at that wage, at 40 here, we will have no more 40 wage, but we will have intersection of SM with the demand at E slash. We have 500 male will be employed, but the wage become 50 instead of 40. So this is the discrimination because they want to employ females. So no female would now be hired by the industry. Females would have to find employment in other industries that do not practice gender discrimination, and this would express wages for all workers in these other industries. So we can say the gain of male workers from gender discrimination in industry comes through the expense of workers, which is both females actually. But in other industries also male will be affected, because when those females they go to the other industries to work, then the chances for male to work also will be less, and the wages will be also reduced. So with the less extreme form of gender discrimination against female, employers in the industry may prefer to hire male over female at the same wage rate. But employers' taste for discrimination is not absolute and can overcome by sufficiently lower wages for female labor than for male labor. You can see this, for example, employer may also hire female if the wage of female worker is say on less $10, from 40 maybe go to 30, for example. So also we can see that, for example, in this figure, that employers, if let's say hire 150 female here at that point, which is I think only $10. Sorry, the wage, sorry, yeah, here go up 35, which is $5 less than 35. So this is for male, this is for female, for female 55. Okay. So, and 450 male to the 600, which is here. The wage will be 45. I'll be slash. So if we compare with 200, female will be paid 40 and 400 male will be paid also 40. So you can see now employers either they do no discrimination, they pay male and female exactly the same. Or we have more female will be hired and less male. So we have here 200 and 400 male. But also they can do it in a way that they reduce the wage for female and hire less female, only 150 with 35, but they hire more male. Instead of 400, they will hire 450, but the wage increased to 45. That is a discrimination. Once again, males gain at the expense of female and other employees of this and the other industries also. The gain is larger than the greater is the employer taste for discrimination in the industry. How much those employees they want to discriminate, then the effect or the discrimination will. But if only some employers in the industry discriminated against females, so they would employ only male workers, while non-discriminating employers would employ mostly all female. And in that case, we have no male, female. For example, that employer employ all female, that employee employ all male, or that industry employ all male, that in another industry employ all female. So here we will not have that wage differences. And even if all employers in the industry discriminated against female, so that female wages tend to be lower than the wages of male workers, but more firms would enter the industry because attracted by lower female wages. So they entered to the industry, and this once again would tend to eliminate gender-based wage differences, because those newly entered the industry because they were attracted by the low wages of female, they increase the demand for female workers, and therefore the wages will be also increased for female until reach the male, and we will have no another discrimination. So we come to the end of the class.